Welcome to Plat Chat Overwatch, episode 218. I'm here with Jake, Casores, and Tensa. Two special guests joining us this week for OWCS NA. The playoffs, the first main event is coming up. So, we wanted to pick their brains, especially when we got such a complicated meta. We need all the intelligence we can to break it down, figure it out, what's going on. But first of all, before I just wanted to throw an easy kind of question your guys' way. So I'm going to start with you, Tensa. It's the first time I get the opportunity to chat with you. So I got an easy layup question for you right here. I just have to ask, you're coaching Timeless, of course. Why didn't Custa make the roster?
Timeless was actually formulating their own kind of roster before I was a part of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Timeless actually ended up picking up the entirety of the Wisp roster later down the road. So unfortunately couldn't fit Custa into the lineup.
Oh damn!
Obviously, had there been a proper tryout process, Custa would have been there. Just like me.
Yeah, he probably could have made it, but we had to import a Korean player for that.
All right, yeah. Tough beat. Maybe next time, Custa, you can beat out the opener. There's always stage 2. There's roster mania going on. Like North America, especially, seems like a lot of moving pieces. Not even talking about the M80s incident. It seems like there's a lot of roster mania going on. So you never know, Tensa. Would you leave the door open for Custa?
It never hurts to give someone a try again.
There you go. Maybe it was nerves. It's been a while,
I think Custa's too smart for that roster. Personally.
Okay. All right.
His calls are just a little bit on a too high of a level, so we just might need to slow things down a little bit so everyone else can keep the pace.
Can't make it too complicated.
Can't make it too complicated. What about you, Casores? Would you leave the door open for Custa?
I think Custa as a content creator could be a great fit with the Defiant. But Custa as a player,
oh boy,
maybe not so much.
It's that phase of the career.
All right. Well, I know you're eager also to maybe get on one of these rosters, Jake. So
Yeah. As a content creator,
hey man, Casores, they picked up Commander X as a content creator, co-streaming the scrims and stuff. So doors might be open. There might be some budget laying around, Jake.
I've got my fingers in many pies these days. So I'm always open.
Yeah, how's the coaching program doing, Jake? How's the $100 coaching program going?
It's good. It's good. I do probably something like 10 sessions a week at least, which is I'm super happy with.
There you go. All right. Well, I don't have that going for me. But what I do have going for me, before we get into today's topic, see, I'm getting better every time.
Let's go.
I'm getting better every time, all right? Spring break's knocking at the door, and it's time to upgrade that below-the-belt game. The real flex this year is keeping your boys downstairs fresh and clean. Nobody wants to be the guy with Pube Fiesta. That's where our buddies at Manscaped created the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, the ultimate weapon to tame those unruly bushes. Before you hit that pool party, make sure your boys are groomed to perfection. Join the Manscaped revolution by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with code Plat Chat. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra is where it's at, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, the game changer in your grooming arsenal. And also, featuring on today's episode, we got to give a shout out, of course. It's our friends at Factor Meals. Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals make eating better every day easy. Whatever tomorrow takes you, be ready with pre-prepared, chef-crafted, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. You'll have over 35 different options a week to choose from, including keto, calorie smart, vegan, plus veggie, and more. And there's even more to enjoy with over 55 nutrition-packed add-ons that help make your weekly meal planning even more delicious. What are you waiting for? Get started today and have a feel-good week of meals ready to go. Head to factormeals.com/Overwatch50 and use code Overwatch50 to get 50% off. That's code Overwatch50 at factormeals.com/Overwatch50 to get 50% off. This is perfect for us gamers. I say this every week. Perfect for us gamers. You're in ranked. You're queuing ranked for 5 hours. The kids these days, I'm seeing, RuPaul scrim, and then RuPaul gets on the stream. And that, perfect. Just after scrims, microwave some Factor Meals, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Eat some food, and then you're ready to jump into the practice again. This is perfect for all the Overwatch gamers out there. So thank you to our sponsors, Manscaped and Factor Meals, of course. But now, we got to get into the real meat and potatoes of this week. are the lovely meta that even on broadcast, like they didn't really hide from the fact that it wasn't really as diverse as we were hoping after the patch. Tensa, I saw your tweet, the other day as well about how this mid-season patch like kind of screwed things up. So I'm gonna start here. Rating 1 to 10, Tensa. How fun is it coaching this Mauga meta compared to the meta we had before?
I mean, in terms of coaching it, I'd say it's like 7 out of 10. It's not like too bad in that regards, but I think it definitely trivialized kind of the things that we were playing like previous patch where it was a lot more versatile. Now it's like teams are starting to just only play Mauga like over time. Even a few other teams are, trying to counter comp it, but it's mostly just like you just see Mauga, Lucio, and then some variation of DPS that people are still trying to figure out, and then it's a mess currently. It's a mess currently, but
it's a different coaching style because you're coaching more like cooldown management and rotating ultimates, right? Can you kind of describe like what coaching it is like for you?
It's a bit different from previous patches where it's like
Okay.
this version of Overwatch is just a little bit of just keeping track of enemy cooldowns, of course, but it's just about being disciplined with how you're managing them and keeping track of everything that's going on, getting everyone on the same page. I think this is just a different version of Overwatch where a different skill set is needed outside of like just pure mechanics. It's just coordinating with each other and just being really attentive to what people are doing, because it's not really based off of, oh, you found that random kill. It's based off of who just messed up really their positioning or cooldown management, ult usage, stuff like that. So it's mainly just getting people on the same page in that regard.
What about you, Casores? I mean, you've been around for a while. You were back on Atlanta Ranger in the GOATS meta and stuff like that. And I guess it is a bit of a brawl meta in that regard. It's a lot about cooldowns. How are you experiencing the Mauga meta so far?
Yeah, I'd say it's very similar to GOATS. I think an even more recent example that it's really similar to is that Queen meta we had in 2022 Stage 3,
Jokes,
where, with both the Mauga shout and the Queen shout, it's like you have one really strong cooldown that you're just doing everything to try and force out. And if you force it out first, you're most likely winning the fight, depending on like the rest of your positioning and moving pieces. But like Tensa said, it's just a different ball game where it's more about like perfect cooldown usage. There's more mirrors going on. While before it was more, oh, the enemy team is playing this. Oh, let's counter it with this. And I just so happen to have the most flexible tank in the whole world, I would like to say. That's now neutralized by a Mauga meta. So, we're making things work, but like Tensa said, it's a different skill set. And what we're really focusing on now is just the tempo of the game and playing it like a MOBA, You need your push and pull. You need your who's going to take the angle, like who's marking what's this person's job. While before I was focusing my coaching more on win conditions, hero swaps, what do we play on this map, what do we play on that map, and now it's still fun to coach, but it's different, and we're trying to figure out ways where we can still use our super flexible roster as much as we can.
Yeah, I always found from a coaching perspective that like the one tricking metas are in a way, as a coach, it doesn't matter so much in terms of like how much impact you have, because if there's a more diverse meta, you don't go as deep as a coach because you're figuring out, okay, like which strategy should we even play, and as you were saying, Cass. But then these type of metas, you have a lot more depth in terms of the coaching, because you're gonna spend a lot of time how every aspect of this mirror plays out. Like theoretically, you could do the same thing in a lot of comps, but it's just not realistic when you're playing 10 comps. Whereas when everyone's playing the same comp, it really is this like super deep dive on, okay, every ultimate has a clear purpose that's like the best value purpose. How do we get every single ult to be the best value, and what are the conditions each player is looking for? Especially ult cycle, I find it was always huge in these types of comps. Like you have to have the right you can respond with A, B, or C, but if it's not A, you're probably losing. So how do you always have A to deal with exactly this scenario you want to deal with? I'm curious though, from your guys' perspective on the DPS. I think that is still the area where there's the most room for innovation. I have a hard time seeing anything but like, maybe you could cut the Lucio, but I have a hard time seeing anything but Curie being dominant with how good the Curie ult is with Mauga and just all these types of heroes standing on the Curie ult, kind of broken. But I'm curious. Maybe that's not true. Actually, I'm kind of curious where outside of Mauga, where you see the innovation being, and whether it's the Sim or like the Reaper Sombra, all have interesting interactions with Mauga. I'm kind of curious for either of you guys, like where you see those other heroes starting to drift, or any predictions you might have for that type of the meta.
I think teams' first impressions, for the meta at least for Mauga comp, was like teams playing Reaper Sombra with like Moira at the start, and that was because Moira is more effective at like healing those characters and just having high uptime, just farming ults and just going through ult cycles. It's slowly deviating a little bit away, or like there's like kind of like a middle ground where some teams are implementing Symmetra, some teams are implementing Sojourn, like adding just different DPS like every time. Like what's more annoying to play? What's more annoying to play versus how do we mitigate the effectiveness of Mauga in general? It's just teams right now in this volatile state for Mauga meta are just trying to determine what's like best for them at the moment.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. I think, the support line, it's either Lucio Moira or Lucio Kick. I don't think there's too much of a difference, depending on what DPS you play. But like Jake said, it's really the DPS where we can get like difference. I think Mauga Shout right now, it's too strong with the overhealth that it gives, with the damage reduction and the healing it gives. I mean, it's too much of a perfect package where it just enables so many DPS that are brawly, right? But your flavor of brawly DPS, that's where you can deviate, right? Like, do you want to play the Sim, or do you want to play the Reaper, or do you want to play both, is what we're seeing in this clip right now, right? I think for me, the Sim is really interesting, where it gives you so much playmaking ability with the teleporter, where you can dodge these chokes where Reaper is conventionally really good, right? Reaper just wants to hold a corner, stick there. The Sim is being played in conjunction with the Sojourn to skip those corners and make sure that your Sojourn gets a really good angle. So I think depending on what DPS players you have, and depending on the map that you're on, I think that's where you can make the most difference. And then I hope that that's where teams make a difference, depending on, like, do we have a hit scan player, right? Because traditionally hit scan players aren't insane at Reaper, or do we have two flex DPS players like M80, where they want to play the Reaper with Pelican?
Do you think it's kind of trending towards Symmetra being like the highest skill comp possible? Because we've seen a lot of Symmetra being played in Korea, I believe. I actually, to be honest, haven't quite watched the VODs, but I've heard a lot of Symmetra being played in Korea compared to like North America, where obviously Hydron playing Symmetra here, but for the most part it feels like it's mostly Sombra, Reaper, Sojourn. Do you feel like Symmetra has the highest kind of skill ceiling because of what you mentioned about the teleporter?
Yeah, I think Symmetra has such an insanely high skill ceiling, as in team aspect, right? It allows you to skip these chokes. It allows you to do all kinds of creative plays, but it also has the most potential to mess things up, right? Like, if you just get booped off the TP and one person doesn't rotate, or one person just barely didn't hear something, you look like utter clowns, right? Which I think in a lot of metas we've seen this, and I think Symmetra has the most skill ceiling, but it also has the easiest, like, oh, in a match we're a little bit nervous, and I barely didn't hear we should TP right, and I walked off like 2 meters from my TP, and suddenly a Lucio boops me and I die, So I think if perfectly played, I think probably Symmetra comp is the best. But especially in a match setting, in a tournament setting, which we're going into now, it might be a case of maybe we should play the easier comp, where we can mess up the least and make these other teams make the mistake and just capitalize.
There's an interesting question there. I feel like in the end, at like in the end, in the sense of like coming together at like the very best teams playing each other, I feel like Sim almost has to be the strongest pick, with some of the interesting utility. Like, for instance, it's like one of the only things in the game that gets you out of Mauga cage without an ult. It's like, I think the only thing in the game actually that gets your whole team out, or that like neutralizes it, other than EMP. I guess running Sombra EMP is like just another perspective. You just always have it for that. And then if you run Sim and Mauga, you could get like both of your ults EMP'd or something like that. But I think that the Sim's ult has always seemed like after whenever they rework Sim, that ult has actually always been just so crazy. Like the shield wall in these brawl comps, like allowing you to just take the whole map away from the NDT, or like just change the map in a very innovative, creative way. I think like what London showed in the last season of the Overwatch League with their Sim is like they showed that this can be consistent, right? That like you can, even though the TP and like there's all these coordination problems and it's so challenging to execute really well, that the potential they have to like open the map up with like 2 different groups playing on the TP entrances, and especially with the buff to the TP health, I think that's like a kind of a huge deal for team play. Like that and the raw DPS buff on the left click, those are like huge for team play, which is so interesting because Sim, I think normally in ranked is like more of a meme hero, but when you add like this team coordination aspect to every aspect of her kit, whether it's how high her DPS is as a glass cannon who needs her whole team to protect her in order to do that DPS, or how high the potential for movement is with the TP.
I mean, I think that's better to shoot the cage and like.
Yeah, I mean, breaking the cage is huge, right? Like,
yeah.
like you can just break the cage really quick. You can TP your teammates out. So I just feel like the matchup with Mauga is so good, and theoretically, getting the lifesteal buff on a full energy Sim should be like really crazy. But like you said, like Sim is also can't do anything about boops. Can't it's like fully reliant on team play. So at the moment there's one little gap in the team play, things fall apart, and then that feels good to be playing Reaper Moira and just running it down on people.
Yeah, it does feel bad when teleporter just dies and you're like, well, we picked Sim for this. Tensa, I'm curious about you. When you're preparing Timeless, of course, going into the main event here, are you coaching more about what you think is the best comp in the Mauga meta, or are you coaching more like what's comfortable for your team, your roster, and what the players really feel best playing in that regard?
So from my perspective, since a lot of teams are doing different things for different reasons, we're not necessarily preparing for like what's the best team comp necessarily, but we're just making sure as a team that we're always on like the same page for anything really. So when it comes to prepping, we're just mainly just trying to like get fundamentals down really hard, so that if we're playing a team that's like for whatever reason playing something we haven't seen before, we're just ready for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, especially because there's so many teams, right? There's so many teams in the main event, so you just kind of play your own game. You can't really prep for what the enemy team is doing. You just gotta be ready for kind of whatever coming your way. So I do kind of want to discuss like how we got here to this Mauga meta, because it did feel like we were in a really good spot. Like for the most part, like we saw a lot of different comps. I was never a fan of the Ramatra, Lucio Moira being played in EMEA before the midseason meta. As in, like, I didn't enjoy it from like a viewer perspective. Like it just wasn't my favorite Overwatch to watch. But we also saw lots of different stuff. We saw, the Doom Kiri, Lucio being played, more dive in Korea and stuff like that. So like, how do we kind of get here? We know that the patch notes, of course, they buffed like 15 characters. They reduced the damage passive, and they also buffed Mauga, which, they put all that together. It's never good. But like, where do you kind of think the developers went wrong here, Tensa? Like, do you think that maybe they had a wrong philosophy, or do you think that they should have maybe taken things a bit slower? Do you think that the damage passive nerf was a bit overboard? Like, what are your kind of thoughts on the patch as a whole, and where do we kind of go from here?
I mean, I think the recent patch like just hard changes or hard enables like the heroes that people don't like playing versus in general. Like we had like a couple of changes to like Roadhog, like Mauga, Symmetra, just all these heroes that most people don't really enjoy playing versus, and it just kind of threw a wrench into like how everyone was prepping for like the main stage tournament, because recently we were not given like OPR accounts. So had we been given OPR accounts, we probably could have been playing on like the previous patch, because I don't think anyone is too thrilled about this current patch that's going on right now. But in terms of like what's going on in that regard, it is quite annoying, but it, I'm not sure what Blizzard's going for, because I think we're reverting back to like, oh, everyone's like borderline invincible. Everyone has high HP, when with the DPS passage being it's 15% now instead of 20. A hero like Mauga is now basically invincible because of the change to Mauga specifically as well.
I think the biggest thing for me is I actually really like that they're having these quick patches that are also in tournaments. Of course, a week practice isn't a lot. Patch drops on Tuesday. If you have a match that weekend, it's not great. But I've always been a fan of tournament games being on the same patch as the live patch, just for viewer engagement.
Sure, yeah.
So even, if it harms my team and we've maybe practiced, the Doom Comp, we are probably the best team in EU and NA on. Even if it harms my team, I think I'd rather be playing on the live patch because it will engage viewers more. It will keep the game more up to date. Playing on the last patch when ranked is different just isn't that good for viewership. So I don't mind that much that they're keeping, this Mauga patch in. Of course, it's not the greatest patch to have it happen on the first time. We'd rather have the reverse, where it was a bad patch before and they patch it. Now it's a good patch for the main stage. But I think the philosophy there is good, and they should keep, the tournament games on the same patch as the live patch. Now, how we got here is a really different question, right? Because they nerfed the DPS passive, and they buffed Mauga in 3 different ways, or 2 different ways, where they gave him overhealth, which is the most broken thing in the game, because you can just go down to like half HP, you pop your overhealth, and then you can just heal while your overhealth is active. So it almost functions as like a Zarya bubble, right? Even more so than like a Queen Shout, because you have more healing on Mauga. And then also you've got the DPS or the DPS passive nerf, and you've got a cooldown, buff going for that with Mauga. So they just buffed Mauga in too many ways while nerfing the DPS passive, and it just ended up being like too much. I think what they've got to do is just pull back Mauga, maybe just remove the overhealth or up the cooldown like they did with Queen, so it's more of like a cooldown based game. But I think the philosophy there is not bad. I think they just made an oversight in how much of a buff overhealth really is.
Yeah, I think like the fact that the overhealth doesn't charge enemy ultimates is like a sleeper big deal too. Like all the heroes that generate overhealth are just like very good because of that. Like you said, it's one of the strongest mechanics in the game. I feel like the danger with these like snowballing sustain heroes, I think there's something for me that's like, I don't mind Mauga getting buffed from the perspective of like, okay, last patch he was like super weak and terrible since he just always takes damage from DPS. The DPS passive was hitting him super hard and he just didn't seem strong enough in that meta. But then when they buff him in so many ways, I think Mauga just has this fundamental problem as a hero where once he like kind of comes over the line into his stats being too good, and becomes like a little bit invincible, then it becomes this like super oppressive, overwhelming thing that you can't play anything against. Whereas, I think if you change the design a little bit, so he's not so devastating at close range, and so like that's like all he does is devastate you at close range, like that's his only playstyle. I think if they just take some power off of that, like take some power off of the shooting both guns at once at point blank, and maybe like you can give him a buff at the same time. But I think that part of his kit is just a little bit fundamentally unhealthy. So one other attribute is like the fact that DPS can walk into the AoE and then leave it, and they maintain the passive, like the lifesteal and stuff. That is really crazy. So you can like start the fight with or maybe not start the fight, but like if you're playing against a non-Mauga comp, you can just rip your shout and just run at the enemy, and all your DPS, like even if you're playing, like if you weren't playing a mirror, you might play a hero like Tracer. And then having Tracer with like with like lifesteal, this hero is just unkillable now, right? It deals enough damage and it doesn't have enough HP to where it really needs any more healing than that. And so you're just like hyper enabling heroes that probably shouldn't be good with Mauga, right? Like Tracer, if Mauga is going to be this strong rushing brawling hero, he shouldn't really be able to work too well with heroes who don't stay next to him, right? That should be like a weakness for him, maybe.
So you're saying like if Mauga enabled heroes like Reaper, fair enough.
It's like Reaper and Bastion.
But like if you're enabling like Tracer,
I
Genji, or not Genji, but like Tracer, like what are we doing? Like that's not really what Mauga should be about.
And I think that's also part of what makes him so dominant is that he's so flexible about who he's being played with. He's not really like limited to these certain heroes. And then I think the DPS passive. I'm not a fan of nerfing that. Maybe I'm DPS pill, but I really like the DPS passive. I honestly think you could give that to every hero in the game. You could just make every hero, when you take damage, period, you get health reduction or heal reduction. Like I don't even think that like it's cool on the DPS, but honestly, I think that'd be fine for every hero in the game. Just in general in Overwatch, if you are taking damage, you are not getting as much heal throughput. So there's like a reason to hide when you're low. I think that fundamental game mechanic is actually really good for the game versus I don't need to hide, just heal me more. Like that style of the game is what I think that we were transitioning away from with the season 9 patch. And I think it's a dangerous style when the heals out overwhelm the DPS. That's usually when the metas become, what most people consider not fun or low skill. When you just don't worry about what the enemy team is doing is not that important. You just do what you want to do, and you do it. It's so strong, like statistically, that you don't have to worry about what the enemy team is doing. It's not a very interactive game if that's how you can look at it.
I feel like the biggest fundamental problem is Mauga's just good into every tank. Like, he doesn't have like a weak matchup into any tank, right? Because he's good against dive tanks because of his ult, right? Normally he'd be bad against Doom, but you can lock down Doomfist with his ult, so that gives him a great matchup against dive tanks. He's fine against poke tanks like Sigma because you can just pressure, shout, like you said, give the shout to your whole team, and then you can run in at the Sigma and probably knock him down because he can't rock you. And then he is a good matchup against every other brawl tank because you just stand next to them and shoot them and heal more than them. So I think Mauga would be more feasible if he has like worse matchups, right? Like if maybe his pin didn't go as fast or would be able to get rocked, he'd have a bad matchup against Sigma. Like there needs to be some sort of counterpick to him, but the only counterpick seemed to be picking DPS that can whittle him down before he does that. But now with, the DPS passive nerf, like Jake said, you can't do that anymore, and he gets the overhealth. So I'm not sure where they can take him, really. I think that fundamentally his guns are just flawed.
So like, would you like increase the spread on like the guns to not make him viable to like long range? Like he had to be like real up close, or like remove the unbreakable from the overrun, or like something like that.
I think you just have to take power away from the E, right? Like maybe make it so if you leave the E, it immediately goes away, right? Unlike Lucio passive, or at least remove the overhealth. I'm not sure where to take him, where he'd like fit a niche where he just doesn't get replaced by another brawl tank. It's like
because I just feel like when I watch you scrim, like when I watch some of your scrims, like the last weekends, like M8 or whatever, I messaged this to you as well. Like if someone is playing like amazing Doomfist comp, I just feel like you should be able to play around the Mauga somewhat. Like you should be able to play like ring around the Rosie or like flank around him, flank around the team and find the openings. But it's just not like viable at this point. So
yeah, don't worry. We've tried to counter the Mauga. We tried to defeat the evil in the first few days. But the thing about the Mauga is you're so flexible the DPS you can pick. You can counter every single tank through DPS picks, not necessarily through needing to change the Mauga. So in those scrims, maybe the Doom does well into the Reaper Mauga. Right, Doom does pretty good into Reaper Mauga, but then they go Tracer Mauga, and then suddenly it becomes really hard for Doom, right? And it's easier to swap a DPS than swap a tank because those ultimates are less impactful and are charged faster. So in the end, like the swapping game becomes bad for you if you're trying to swap tanks and they're trying to swap DPS.
And generally, you can throw away DPS ults and does not care that much versus the tank ults and support ults are generally. And so having like a Lucio Mauga and then maybe Kirimura that's like basically fixed, you're just snowballing the game from the enemy swapping back and forth to counter you. You're getting further and further ahead by never swapping your core. If indeed you can win with these. And I think that's part of the thing is like why does Mauga work so well with Tracer? That's like probably that's like should be a really bad comp. It shouldn't really fit together, but because of how you just grab the overhealth or grab the lifesteal and just go, that's like that's pretty ridiculous for heroes like you could go in on like Genji or something with lifesteal and even if the Mauga's not there. I was thinking as you were talking about the Mauga overrun though, like something interesting they could tweak is I'd love to see. I get that overrun probably needs to have some kind of skill invuln because or else it's just like some heroes like Ana are just gonna like instantly sleep you when you run at her and it'll just be impossible.
Hey, guess
for
what?
you.
Reinhardts don't have that privilege. Come on, come on.
That
man.
is true. The Reinhardt pin also one shots you
years.
on most of the heroes in the game, so I think there's a little slight difference. But I think for Mauga it's like what if he has like some what's it called, unbreakable or like
something like that, yeah,
unstunnable at the start of the run. And then once you like get close, or maybe once you jump, or maybe after like 2 seconds or whatever, like if you're far enough away that then he like he's got like basically the first half of it is going to be unbreakable. If you're right on top of somebody, you can like run through their skill. If they like, you know, you see the Sigma casting rock and you can run through it and dodge it. But if you're just going to run across the map at Sigma, he could like wait you out and rock you when you know, like the charge goes long. Because I think I would always thought when Mauga came out, I thought, okay, Sigma and Orisa will be good heroes again. Actually, originally Orisa was just broken where you could crit on Fortify with
Right.
burning. But that has been fixed. And so I thought even maybe this meta, like maybe there's some hope for Orisa to be like sort of okay in the matchup since you can't get crit if you're fortified. But in the end, Orisa's just like doesn't do enough at close range. You know, Mauga just like waits out through your fortify and it runs away. It runs out and then you die and you're spin and it runs out and you die. And you're just not doing enough to Mauga to really scare him off you, even though you're fortified and stuff. And I think for Sigma, it's like Sigma should be good here since he's like he's not letting you lifesteal at all, right? He has like so much damage mitt, but you just run over Sigma and like maybe it's just the game is just too fast for him to really play.
Me personally, I think his design is just completely flawed. He's like the type of hero that I would vault and like try to just redo him entirely. Because my problem with him is that he doesn't have too much counterplay. He just kind of just dashes at you. You can't really do too much about it. At least with Reinhardt, you can stun him, boop him, and control him in some way. But with Mauga, it's like, oh, he just does it. And there's nothing to do. There's nothing to it. And then it's the same thing with his overhealth overdrive. It's like he just presses shift and you can't really counter it other than run away or play Ana, but she's not in a good spot. So where's the counterplay? There isn't any. And then a hero that's kind of interpreted as a niche hero is like ends up to being the most versatile hero now, because he's overtuned. So for me, it's like his flaws fundamentally his design's fundamentally flawed, and I don't like him at all.
Yeah,
I was thinking. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was thinking. Now that I'm thinking about, maybe what they could do is give him the Roadhog treatment, where he becomes an old battery. Just remove all his armor. If you just remove all his armor, he becomes an old battery that still is really good in the brawl. But you can burst him down like faster. Because right now, what Maugas do is they brawl until their armor's gone, and then they use shout, right? And then they regen the armor again. So it's almost like he is 2 times the armor currently. I think like an easy, like quick fix, like apart from reworking him, might be to just remove his armor and keep the overhealth, and maybe that would put him in like a good spot.
Or maybe if you do get a stun on him, he actually dies in the burst, which is incoming damage theoretically. But I also think with Mauga, I mean, I was thinking about this part of it is like the double chain gun thing is just like so abusive, regardless of the shout, right? Like some heroes, like most of the brawl heroes basically are just like anything that wants to play close range just can't against Mauga. Like how do you play Winston? This hero just like is a close range hero. How do you play that against Mauga? Other than just never be within, I don't know, 20 meters of the Mauga. Like,
well, I guess I'm
he
kind of
just
fine
don't
with
play
that
the
part.
game.
Yeah.
No, like maybe Winston's not the pick, but like you said, Sigma. Like why wouldn't you be able to play Sigma into Mauga?
Sure. Maybe Mauga can counter Winston. That's like okay, but Sigma, Sigma should be able to play. I think Sigma thing, I think more comes from the style of Mauga, just the fact that Mauga wants to play this like very fast rush, and you're enabling him so much with speed and all these other mechanics that like Curie ult and stuff. That the worst thing for Sigma is just getting run over. In the end, as long as Sigma can kind of control the game and keep everything in front of him, he will be really good against Mauga, I think. And he individually is, I think, good against Mauga. It's just that you can't successfully control the game that way. You can't successfully make it a front to back game. You start playing heroes like Zen and Sigma, then when their lifesteal tracer is like 3 blinking on you, and they're gonna play like Tracer Genji Mauga or something heinous. They just like hard rush your backline, and everyone's dying all at once. Too much chaos for Sigma to really play. So I think Mauga just needs some more weaknesses in his kit. One of the things I was thinking about is just taking away this. Like, don't let you double chain gun all the time. Like, maybe you can only double chain gun in your E and in your ult or something like that. Like, you just have to only shoot one or the other normally. So basically, like, you can, if you know what I mean? Like, so if you're going to press your E for max DPS, you might have to press that while you're still full HP. So you can't do full DPS, wait to get low. The E is only defensive, but it also synergizes with you doing more DPS. You know, like there's
I don't
no
know.
there's no
I
weakness.
think the double chain gun is like a pretty, you know, I don't know if novel is the right word. I'm Swedish, but like I think it's a cool idea. I think it's a cool idea. To,
But maybe you can just limit it into like certain parts of the kit. You know, so like if you're playing heroes that get close range, you at least can be like, okay, well, because I think real part of the problem for me is like some of the other brawl heroes could be competitive with Mauga in like a brawl, except they just can't because of the nature of the lifesteal. The fact that like, you know, he's gonna just trade with you so efficiently over time. But I think if you weren't able to just double chain gun 24/7, you actually would be able to kind of face tank against him as Orisa or as Ramantra. You know, I think Mauga could still be good, but I feel like Mauga's in a healthy meta. For me, the purpose of Mauga, or like the fit for him, is this like sort of rush tank that is anti-dive. You know, like that rather than maybe a shield isn't so good against dive when you're in rush, where you're like, well, how useful is it to block one angle when the enemy's all around me? So maybe I'll play a hero like Mauga who can like really bully your Winston. Wright can lock down all your flankers. You know, I think there's something interesting there. It's just that he shouldn't be so good in the brawl mirror and so good against dive. The Sigma mirror is just, that's like a very clear sign of overtuning. If you're winning against a Sigma comp with Mauga, it's like something's clearly wrong. You know, this is like for me the most obvious counter in the game is Orisa and Sigma should both be obvious counters, and they're just not. They just don't actually work. And that's when there's a big red flag on the patch, when what should be like a really strong counter comp just gets run down and you just smoke them. I think there's a red flag on the play there.
Well, I feel like we've discussed Mauga to death in the community. I know Group Up podcast, I did like a 4-hour podcast talking about the patch notes. So not only did we do a 3-hour podcast last week, Jake and AVRL talking about Mauga and the patch notes, AVRL then jumped on and talked 4 more hours about Mauga. So I think we're good on the Mauga content. But I do want to chat about a few different heroes. One of the heroes that also got buffed last week was Sombra, who received some ultimate cost reduction by 8%, some virus impact damage. You know, Sombra is one of those heroes as well that after the transfer killer change was kind of in a tough spot where, you know, way easier to punish. How do you guys feel about Sombra now? Do you feel like Sombra's in a good place? Is Sombra mostly enabled by Mauga being the tank, or, you know, are you pretty happy where she's at?
I think personally, I'm pretty happy where Sombra's at. Yeah, I think she's only played right now because her ult counters cage, right? Like she farms ult so fast of just Mauga being a giant meatball that's why Sombra's being played. I think if Mauga isn't played 24/7, you would see Sombra in the way where I want her, as like a counter to Hammond or Doomfist, you know, like as a counter to these niche characters that very much rely on their abilities or getting in and getting out, where you can play this different style of game based around EMP and based around her hacks, where she is just a utility character. And in the end of the day, that's where she should be. I think she's in a bad spot where she can just go cloak and one-shot Zenyatta, you know, over and over again, right? That's where I think she's in a bad spot. But right now, that's not how you play her. And I think with Translocator being like this, she's actually punishable when you force her out, right? Like, I feel like that's the biggest part that I like about her kit now. You see where she's translocating to, and a lot of the time you can't punish her, but that also makes her more of just a frontliner right now, right? I think in certain metas, she could be like a flanker still, but I think right now, the way I see her is just soldier, but less damage, better ult.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good description. What about you, Tensa? Have you been experimenting with Sombra? How do you feel about her?
At the start, we were playing like a pretty decent amount of Sombra, but I'm not sure where we're going to be going with her in these next few days. But I'm not quite sure how I feel about Sombra, because, like, you know, the old Sombra is kind of like you would, you know, set up a dive or you go on flank on Sombra, and now she's kind of played like a second Soldier 76 with like a 10 times better ult. Like, I'm not quite sure where she fits nowadays, or how I would want her to be ideally. But the thing that I like about her now, like Casores said, is that she's a lot more punishable. Previously, she was like, you know, if she got discovered at all, she just translocates out easily, click of a button, she doesn't have to like do anything, and she's just out. With this version of Sombra, easily punishable. She didn't get like that much play time into every single matchup because like she just wasn't able to free reign as she used to. Another like gripe that I had with her previously was like her ult was gigantic. It was almost it was almost impossible to dodge. And then also when she was invis, she could just hack for free. There's no like usually you can't just cancel the hack. She just kind of just does it, and then you're just hacked. So I think I like where she is right now, but I'm not quite sure where I would have her ideally.
Yeah, I personally am a huge fan of the Sombra rework. I think that's a great example of like a rework that just I think worked out fantastically in terms of like the hero. I mean, honestly, Sombra was just like a really flawed design before, where it's like basically half a hero, except you just never die. So it's like, you know, like you're not doing as much as other heroes, but you just never stop doing it. And so that's how I'm good at the game. And then in a team play setting, it becomes really broken because being perma-stealth and scouting everybody, and especially with the ping system, that was a huge buff to Sombra, in my opinion. Like enormous buff to Sombra in Overwatch 2 was just the fact that you're ping, like the difference between calling to your teammates and telling them where people are versus just like pinging and it's on your teammate's screen is actually, I think, a huge deal for competitive play. And so scouting those dives with no punishment gave her like basically a third ability that frankly doesn't exist for 95% of the player base, where people just don't do that. But at a certain level, it becomes this problem. But now it's like you still have all that top end potential. Theoretically, you can still do everything you could do before, and maybe even better. But you're taking much bigger risks. You know, you make a mistake, you get spy checked, and you know it's costing you heavily. Which I think that's exactly what the game should be about. Like I like that Sombra has these like really powerful skills. I think EMP being really powerful is good. Sombra having more kill potential on her own is good. But she takes a risk for it. And I think that same principle is pretty much applied or should be applied universally in Overwatch. That like, yes, every character has something very powerful and impactful they can contribute, but they also have some way that they can get punished and some issue, some like hole in their kit. You know, I think part of the problem, you know, some heroes like Tracer, I think don't pass that test personally, but Tracer's okay because in order to do what she needs to do, she's so high skill. So it's like, okay, that's like her own, she's gated by that. I guess theoretically Tracer's weakness is cage fight, hack, and Cassidy nade. All three of which you can just basically dodge from your positioning. But you know, Tracer, we could put an asterisk on her since she's so high skill to successfully outplay your counters. But I think in general, Mauga being that as a sim, you could put the same test on him. Like, yes, he can do these really powerful things like lifestealing super hard on the enemy tank and enabling his whole team with lifesteal. But what's his weakness, right? Like, what's his flaw that I can exploit? And I think that's where the design is the best in the game, when every hero has something powerful and interesting they can contribute, and also some sort of weakness that the enemy team can always look to exploit.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, just reflecting, it just sounds stupid that like Sombra could teleport back anywhere on the map, just with no cool. That just sounds stupid. Like it feels more like an Overwatch 2 hero now. We're just like,
it's much more dynamic, and it's much more in line with the other heroes in the role. Like in the sense that every DPS hero takes risks when they go in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even Tracer, honestly.
I forgot to ask this follow-up after the kind of like the Mauga discussion, but since you're both coaching, if they theoretically, we're recording this on Monday, if they released a hotfix patch on Tuesday, would you welcome that, or do you think that it would sabotage competitive integrity before the main event, like just way too much? So I think we're gonna release this tomorrow on Tuesday, so maybe once this episode is out, people will know if there's a hotfix or not. But would you want to see a hotfix before the event, or would you think that it would just sabotage competitive integrity of OWCS?
I think at this point it'd probably sabotage competitive integrity. As much as I would like for like a viewer perspective and then for a coaching perspective for the meta to be more versatile, I think we're a little too late to make any like last minute changes. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I think they should gut that hero. Just return it to what it was before. But I mean, you're gonna ask the coaches where it's like, if my team's doing well this meta, I'm gonna say no, don't turn it back. And if I'm doing well, then I should say yeah, turn it back. I'm not doing well. Please.
No, but you can't say that because like on Plat Chat in like December we had Hawk on and people were just like a funny Astro, and people were just like, just vault this hero, like rework this hero. It had been out for like a month and people were already saying to rework the hero. So I don't think it's bad etiquette for you to say that, Casores.
Right,
I think a lot of
but I
people
don't
are
think
involved in it.
it's a hero issue. It's more of like a balanced philosophy issue. It's like, oh, we're gonna change things a week before because next time it'll be a good meta, and then maybe you want to hotfix Mauga. I guess it's about the state of ranked, right? Because I feel like even now in ranked, everybody's playing Mauga Mir.
Oh,
right?
the content creators are losing it. I saw Aspen tweet like some tweet the other day. It's just people are losing it.
So
I've been having fun playing Sim. I'm not gonna lie.
You are a psycho.
I like Sim actually.
You're a psycho.
Like
you also probably like playing Sombra.
Yeah. I do play Sombra actually. The new Sombra is fun. I think it's not whatchamacallit. Not like boring or annoying to play now. I feel like new Sombra is fun. I'm actually engaged when I'm in the back line. I'm like, oh, like what am I gonna do if I get caught here? Do I can I go? Can I take a risk running past this guy? You know what I mean? I actually have to put my brain on when I'm stealth. Versus, before I'm like, okay, whatever, I'll just go on this guy. Yeah, we'll farm some EMP, TP, go, cycles, like just like efficiency hero.
Right.
And I feel like I don't know, Sim I think is actually for me is super fun in metas where you actually team play with her. And in a way, even though I don't like that the way they buff Sim with like the turret HP, it's a heinous thing to buff actually. But it's good against Tracer, so you know what? I'm down for any kind of nerfs, like stealth nerf to Tracer. And then in the end, they buff the aspects of Sim's kit that are like most team play enabled, with the left click and the TP are like all basically team play. I mean, as much as the left click is Sim's own damage, you don't really get to do that unless you're team playing. Like the Sim one trick playstyle is the thing that's game ruining, where you just TP around and spam right clicks at people until somebody dies to your spam. Which thank God that's terrible now, honestly, with the season 9 change. But I like playing Sim and like as a person who calls a lot in ranked and like wants to get the team on the same page, it's very powerful to get heavily enabled with the Sim left click and just get torqued up and run people down and TP the teammates around and like be creative with how you approach the game. I don't mind that. I think it's the big.
I'm happy for you, Jake. I'm glad you're enjoying playing Sim.
I like a little Sim. I like I like the silly heroes, Johnny. They always had a place in my heart for the silly heroes.
Yeah,
as long as they're like good actually, and I'm not relying on the enemy team being just stupid to win.
Yeah, from my perspective, I play main support in ranked, and playing Lucio into Mauga and Sombra together, where it's like, okay, I need to sit in the back and beat the MP. Oh wait, my team's caged. I can't do that. I don't really get to play the game. I just AFK farm all, and then that's it. It's not really too engaging for support players at least, but maybe it's fun for you guys. But
that is true. These are the worst metas for support. You just like brain dead heal the whole game, spam your left clicks at somebody who's never gonna die. You're just only farming ult as fast as you can. Yeah, it is a really bad meta for support actually, in terms of just like the interesting aspect of the game.
Yeah, I was prepping for this weekend.
Heal that guy.
And I was gonna ask Funny Astro like. Literally, like, what do you beat? Like, really, like, if maybe you beat the EMP and that's good, but like then they just cycle EMP faster than you cycle beat, and then beating a cage with like a Death Blossom in it, like there's nothing fun to beat. Like you're just you gotta hope for some momentum shift beat, but like for the most part, it just sucks to use that ultimate in this meta. So it's.
I think this is the most times that I've seen like people Ajax like ever. I think
because you're gonna have to, like, you gotta go for it,
Because you gotta go into the cage to beat.
you gotta get in
there, bro.
Yeah, I think like Violet actually like Ajax like 2 or 3 times in a series recently.
Yeah, I mean,
Korea.
Yeah. And ironically, I think I can see that being it's a very scary meta for Lucio with the extra shields in the game. Like even Sim and Mauga, like the fact that the shields block beat means you really you cannot beat from safe locations generally, and that's like what is like normal good Lucio fundamentals is you're like kind of trying to beat somewhere where you can like easily get it off and put it on all your teammates from like a nice reasonable sight line on them, but now that's just not possible. You've got to be like right in the middle of the game. And I mean in these days, especially with like how the DPS buff, like how good people are at hitting headshots and things like that, it's scary. You're half HP, you have to beat, but one headshot you Ajax.
I think beating's never been Violet's strongest point though. I think you can beat pretty safely and then run into the cage, right? Because the beat has like a half a second. Your if you just walk, out
that's
now,
true. You
then
can beat
you'll
through
get
the
it.
shields.
So
you're on a very thin line with that one.
That is true.
That's why you got the sim wall. So you got like the first layer of shield that blocks the beat, and then the second layer is like the real position you play.
Okay. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I'm telling Vega the wrong way.
I don't blame
telling you
Lucio
guys,
players.
Sim's the future. It's the end game. Sim Mauga's the end game.
Oh my god. Oh no. What have we created? We got to wrap up the hero talk here a little bit, but there is one more hero that I want to discuss, and it's a hero we haven't discussed in quite some time, in a little bit. It's been like a month or so. But I put out this tweet at the start of season 9 where one hero in particular, in ranked, in the community, really strong, really overpowered. And I thought like, oh, competitive integrity, OWCS, gotta protect the pro players, gotta protect the teams. You know, I'll get out there, I'll throw out a tweet. So I throw out this tweet. You can put it up, Solomon. And I tweet out that we love Zen, but they should reduce Zenyatta's shields by 25 on Tuesday, like a hotfix. Because I figured like, oh, they're gonna throw out these Tuesday patches before OWCS and people are gonna riot. But now it seems like you guys are kind of just accepting that this is life now after Overwatch League. So maybe I should have put out this tweet. But then a couple days later, or maybe it was the same day, I don't know, someone else tweeted out a different tweet and they wrote this: do not nerf Zen. So I'm kind of curious here, Tensa. Was I wrong, and should they revert the Zenyatta shield change?
You know, when Zen was getting played a lot, he wasn't like truly the best hero to be picked in most scenarios. Like you would just lose to Lucio Kiri like a lot of the times. I think, you know, I agree with the sentiment that Zen shouldn't be super strong by all means, but I think there should be a time where Zen at some point in Overwatch 2 was like a hero that got played a decent amount. But that's kind of where I stand with it, at least. It's like I wanted to see some Zen for the first time in a while, but now it's like, oh, we're never seeing this hero again.
Actually, I'm quite glad they nerfed the Zen HP. I feel like the main problem for Zen right now is that Lucio is too OP. Right? I think if Lucio is toned down, you could actually see some Zen even with the 25 HP nerf, because he is just really strong with lower time to kill in the game, right? He doesn't get bursted as hard by, you know, Sombra or Tracer now, especially when he has a Baptiste or a Brig, but Brig is terrible right now, keeping him safe. So I think Lucio is just too strong, and Lucio Zen is not a good pairing. Like they tried to do it at the start with like the Lucio Zen ball, because you know both those characters were just so broken that you were trying to play them together, but those two characters have no synergy, right? So I think if Lucio is toned down enough, Zen will probably see playtime because he is the strongest poke support still. It's just that the characters that work really well with Lucio right now, the Moira, the Kiriko, you know, they don't work with Zen, right? Like the Lucio doesn't work with Zen, so you don't see Zen. But I think the 25 HP like nerf is good, because if they were to have nerfed Lucio, then Zen would have seen like 200% playtime, right? Like Zen would have been so broken. It's just that Lucio is even more broken right now. So should they nerf Lucio? Probably, right? Because I don't see like any support comp without Lucio right now. Like Brig pales in comparison. Everything gets enabled by Lucio in the game. You know, and probably Mauga also wouldn't be as broken if Lucio wouldn't be this broken.
Yeah, I think Lucio was the most ridiculous hero of the season 9 patch in general. I think not because of Lucio's personal kit, but I think the way the season 9 patch reworked the game, for me, like brings out this style of Overwatch where just tempo is everything now. Being able to like, if like especially with the DPS passive being you know existing in the game. You know, hard healing people and on an individual target who's taking damage is now worse, and like AoE healing to people who, you know, everyone's taking little damage at a time is just much better. And then that's just his heals, which isn't really the reason you ever play Lucio, right? Like the potential of just aggressing on an advantage is too good right now. Like if you get an advantage, the enemy is like losing HP and your trade is going well. You like jump on them and end the fight because you have an advantage, you can take it. And the moment you have a disadvantage or the enemy does something and you're starting to fall behind, you like fully disengage from it. Unless of course you're mirroring Lucio, in which case you don't see that really as much, but then that means you're mirroring Lucio every time, because if the enemy has Lucio and you don't, you're never disengaging from a bad fight, and you're never catching the enemy when the fight is good. And I think that the dance of the game, that push and pull, that was really re-emphasized for me in season 9, which I really like. Maybe just needs some minor tuning for Lucio. Although in the end, I also feel that like Lucio's just a very well designed hero, like in the sense that you don't mind that it's meta. You know, Lucio was like I remember back in the day, man. You had your flex DPS, you had your hit scan, you had your main tank, your off tank, your flex support, and your Lucio. Like there's a
Your
Lucio,
Lucio player.
Yeah, like every team had a Lucio player, and that was like an accepted role for what 3 years. There is like a Lucio player, and I think that's actually like that to that extent is bad actually at this stage of the game. To that extent is too much. But I can accept that the design is good enough on the hero where he's not ever going to be the focus of people's complaint, even if he might be too strong from like just a pure strategic perspective for high level play.
He's probably on the same page as Mauga right now, but Mauga is oppressive to play against. And Lucio is fine to play against, right? He's a fun character. He just buffs his team up.
Yeah, you don't really feel it. You're just like, oh, this guy speeds around, you know.
It also doesn't dominate ranked. I think part of the like Lucio is like really reliant on team coordination. In ranked, I think to be really dominant on Lucio, it's more about individual like fragging on Lucio, which I'm really glad that that's actually a core strength of his kit now, that he comes into the dive and he fights and he's like good, and the wall ride becomes this like super high skill mechanic you can fight with. Like you're not just a speed bot. But then when you get into these metas where it is just running it down on the enemy, then you go back to being just like a speed bot basically, because no one's really killable. The enemy DPS are too strong to fight. It's like when the sim's full energy, you don't really want to go in there. It's the sim turrets on the walls, bro. It's not looking good for you on the Lucio.
I think people don't complain about Lucio or Tracer being OPs because they just have high skill expression.
Yeah.
And then people complain about Mauga because there's not too much skill expression. But that's
we're definitely there as a community now. I feel like, as Jaws put out that tweet too. I know Gate responded to it. We're just like, if these heroes are meta, basically quoting like low skill expression heroes. Like if these heroes are meta, the meta is usually unfun to watch. It's not fun to watch low skill expression heroes, Tensa. So I feel like the community is kind of right at that point, right? Like we don't want to see this anymore. We'd rather see Lucio Tracer.
Yeah. I do want to show some love to the dev team, just in the sense that like I think some of the Overwatch 2 heroes have been like best in class in that regard. I think Sojourn is like best in class on hit scan in terms of skill expression design. Like of all the hit scan ever made, Sojourn's the most interesting by far.
Would you throw in Kiriko there too?
Yes, I think Kiriko's there too.
Yeah.
Maybe the fact that the healing is aimbot is like whatever, because honestly, all the supports have like favorable healing hitboxes, so they're all pretty easy to hit all your heals on, which I think is actually fine for the game. Like I don't have any problem with the heals being easy to land, but like the fact that she's like forced to headshot is like interesting. I think wall climb is interesting. Kiriko not as much, because there's other supports. I think like BAP and Ana, Zen, like some of the OG heroes are still super high skill as well. But I think like Sojourn and Queen are the two that come to mind the most for me as like almost best in class skill expression on the roll. Or like they like weren't scared to put out these like really high skill heroes. And so I don't mind that there's also more accessible heroes coming out, right? I don't mind that like I like that Lifeweaver exists in the game. I wish the design were a little different, but I mean like another healer that is like accessible to people who really like heroes like Mercy that aren't like aim mechanics heavy, I think that's really good for the game actually, and from like a pure just like popularity of Overwatch, accessibility to the game, for people who like these heroes that people that were drawn into Overwatch that never played FPS before. I think that's like really valuable as part of like the fundamental appeal of Overwatch. And so I think it's actually really good these heroes exist in the game, like design wise. I just think it's important from an esports and high level perspective that they never, in the end, if you're going to make these heroes, they kind of cannot be meta at the pro level, because they cannot be healthy meta. Like Mauga, I feel like at the current design, it cannot be a healthy meta, because it's just like, it's either it's almost unplayable or it's super broken. Like once it gets to the point where it's like strong, when Ana is strong, you feel like maybe there's some other way to play, right? Like Ana is never gonna like oppress me, because maybe I can kill the Ana. Like I have this fundamental play style that like I can deal with you. But if Mauga he's like either like if you're just always running away from him and he's just like you can kite him around and kill him, eventually he runs out of steam, it's okay. And then there's a certain threshold that's crossed where it's like, we just can't touch the objective anymore. And when you cross those thresholds on these like sort of lower skill heroes, like if Lifeweaver could just heal like 100% more than he could heal now, he would be the meta, and it would just not even be fun. It would just be like, oh, I can heal more than anything else in the game.
It'd be silly.
It's broken, right? So I think it's just dangerous, because the lows, like without skill expression, that's like an inherent check against certain heroes dominating the game. with Tracer and Ana. If you make the game hard enough for Zen, like even a really good player could struggle when he's getting swarmed and it's just so difficult to play, so limited. But when you make these like lower skill expression heroes strong, they become overwhelming and untouchable very, very quickly. Like the line between terrible and way too good is too fine. And so I accept that they can have low skill heroes in the game, but I think it's just I think the dev team kind of has to accept that some of these heroes should not be buffed just because they have low win rate. Like if your win rate, as long as your win rate's okay for like up to plat or diamond, you just like, that's good. And then like once the win rate becomes 55 plus in GM, that's like a huge issue. Like that hero can never be 50% win rate in GM. Like Lifeweaver and Mercy and Mauga. Honestly, I think it's like maybe up the Masters having a good win rate is like really cool, but then when it's like pro level play, very strong win rate, it's like a red flag and you just have to nerf the hero again or have to like go back and rework it. Like some heroes, that's not true. The high skill expression heroes, that's not true, but low skill expression heroes getting high win rate at the highest skill level has always been sort of the core complaint in balance in Overwatch, that like it's fine for these heroes to exist, they just shouldn't dominate the game.
Yeah.
I think a character they've done that really good with is Mercy. Like I feel like Mercy is in like a great spot right now where she gets punished at the higher levels. You can't play her in like competitive, right? But I don't think she needs to be played in like competitive. I think she should be good up until like Diamond. Even there's some Grandmaster Mercy players that are still having good win rates, right? It's like the movement has good skill expression. It is like the MOBA character where you don't need to aim, but I think her not making it to competitive is just fine, because it is, not that high skill expression. For the aiming side, for the moving side, I think it's one of the highest skill expressions. But I think that's like a character where I think they can take a page out of. You don't need to change her. Even though she's not being played at the highest level, she's in a really good spot, right? And I think that's with Lifeweaver too, right? I think Lifeweaver is in a really good spot right now. Like he's good. He has his niche. And even last year, I was talking with some of the Mayhem guys, and they were using Lifeweaver to counter the London Reinhardt comp. And it was actually working. So he has his spot somewhere. It's just super niche, but that's good with like these not as fun to watch characters. I'd say I wouldn't say like. There's definitely skill expression in Mercy, but it's not as fun to watch as, somebody hitting every sleep on Ana.
Yeah. No, totally agree. And it's a fun example too, because if Joss was here, he'd be molding. I don't know if you often watch Plat Chat, Casores, but Joss hates Mercy. So it's good to see some Mercy praise. Finally, some good talk about Mercy.
I'm also a Mercy fan in general as a hero.
There we go. But that's just because they pocket you, Jake.
Super high movement skill, it's like, even though she doesn't have any aim skill, right? Or realistically, other than very occasionally when you're Valking, like having this crazy movement tech is like super sick, like it gives something for the people who love that hero to be like that's her strength. And I think if you're ever going to buff Mercy, it should always be in that part of her kit. It should always be the part of her kit that's like interesting and dynamic. You know what I mean? Like, so if you're going to nerf Mercy, you should always nerf her like raw stats. She's just like damage boosting somebody all game and it's just too much and they're one-shotting people. Okay, that's what you nerf. But they should never nerf her movement if she needs a nerf. And for Mauga, I think heroes like Mauga, it's like, like take the part of the power out of the kit that's like not interesting or fun, which for me is like double chain gun lifesteal on a tank that you can't miss. Like, does anybody really like that? Even if you play Mauga, it's like, it's like you're just kind of laughing when you do that, but it's not like fun in a way that like makes me like to play the hero.
Okay.
Like we're right? Like when I play Sojourn, I'm like one-shotting people across the map is like that's cool, but like what makes me like to play Sojourn is I'm like sliding around and like dodging you and jumping up to this high, like that's what makes the hero fun, and then it makes it really dynamic and exciting. And so that's like the part of the kit that I think is like we protect this part of the kit at all costs. And then you just have to, like the other parts of the kit that are not fun, like for instance, Sojourn one-shotting people all across the map, I don't think is like interesting or like, what I mean? Like if there is a problem with the hero, you take away this part of the kit that's like not fun for the enemy and doesn't make the game more fun for me because I one-shot you, right? Like if I have to deal more damage before I headshot you with the rail, that doesn't make Sojourn less fun. It makes her weaker, but it doesn't change like how fun she is to play. And I think for Mauga, I guess for me, what seems like the fun part of the kit is probably the run, like running over people and like stomping on them is like pretty cool. But like just lifestealing through infinite DPS is like, that's not an engaging game mechanic. You know, like for me, in a fundamental way, that's not an engaging game mechanic. Or like the fact that my teammates take my lifesteal. I don't even know they're taking my lifesteal. You know what I mean? Like they're just like I didn't even notice that. Like I don't realize that what's going on. You know, but it is. It's super strong. I feel like that's the part of the kit you should take away. The part that doesn't make the hero more fun. It just makes it better. And those things should be nerfed or reduced.
Well, we'll discuss Mauga more in depth next episode, like we haven't done enough already. But I want to move on. I want to move on from heroes and patch talk because there's actually a really interesting new change going on over at the Overwatch Champion Series Korea and Japan, not Pacific, but both of those regions. So they released a statement. I guess it was last night, overnight, when I was asleep. You can pull up the quote here as well, Solomon. We are implementing a new map selection system for OWCS Korea and Japan from the Seeding Decider, LCQ, and Playoffs. Also, it's actually this very format, because they're not playing the same format as NA and EMEA. With the new system, the losing team from the previous map will choose both the next game mode and maps. This decision is based on feedback received from the local community and participating teams, aiming to provide a more varied selection of maps, meta, and strategies from teams. This trial is specific to OWCS Asia region only due to the region's longer stage schedule and limited number of teams per sub-region, resulting in multiple encounters between the same teams. Our objective is to offer audiences fresher, more diverse gameplay and strategy. Therefore, if fans and teams do not like it, we're open to change and strive to find a better format for everyone. So in general, just very open-minded. Seems like a nice change overall. And there's also some pictures here that I guess are pretty relevant, Solomon, that I put in the document right below this one, where you can actually see the map pick rates. And, you know, if you're in EU and EMEA, you're like, yeah, it's been pretty much the same maps every time. But when you look at Korea's maps played so far in this bar graph, for some in particular, it gets pretty extreme when you think about it. So if you take a look at the map picks for Control, Korea hasn't played Ilios a single time, but they played Lijiang 20 times, Nepal 4 times, and I guess Samoa 3 times. So that just tells you, I think you can move on to the next game mode as well.
Lijiang is the best map, so
they like to play King's Row.
They
play 16 King's Row, whereas they played maybe 1 Blizzard World and about 7 Midtowns and 2 Hollywoods. So South Korea has a problem when it comes to picking the same map over and over again. So, you know, this is actually great because we got Tensa and Casores here, you know, coaching perspective on how this happened. It's actually really interesing because it felt like for the longest time,
Japan only played Circuit Royale. They did not play
That's true. Is that true?
Love pick rate.
They love the snipers.
I mean, it's 3 Overwatch over there. They only play
I guess
2
there's
of them.
so few games. It's
Yeah,
so few games.
yeah.
we don't usually make it to escort anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
It's-
So now you actually get to pick the game mode as well. But anyway, it's interesting because I felt like in competitive Overwatch, especially during the Overwatch League, where we had predetermined maps for the most part for regular season games, you know, teams were always like, hey, we want to get this map pick kind of mode going on because then we can pick the maps we're better at, more strategy, don't determine the maps for us. But then we kind of get to this position we are here where South Korea pretty much only picks Lijiang and King's Row. I guess kind of like let's start there. Like, do you think that, you know, this is kind of like, is this an actual problem for South Korea, or has teams not managed to, you know, find strengths on other maps? Is this a result of the meta? Like, why do we think this is? Let's kind of start there. Why is everyone picking Lijiang and King's Row all the time? Let's start with you, Tensa.
I mean, Lijiang King's Row is just a classic for a lot of the players. I think they're probably the most straightforward and easiest to prep for comparative to like the other maps in the map pool. But for me personally, it's like I think there's definitely certain maps where players in general just don't want to play. I think they already announced like the new map pool, and for hybrid at least, Pariso was introduced back. I can guarantee you like 90% of the teams are just going to permaban it or just never practice or pick it at all because they just generally don't like it. But I do like this idea from Korea and Japan where it's like, you know, you can just pick your map and your mode if you're the losing team, because this makes it where, you know, sometimes we never make it to escort, right? Maybe that team that lost is actually pretty good at escort. We can actually see some, you know, escort getting played and see like where their actual strengths are, rather than it just be, oh, it's just this specific set of maps and modes that it has to be played in this order, and we never like, you know, get to that point. But it definitely gives some power. to the losing team to, you know, make that comeback if they need to, and adds it a little more depth to strategy.
I think the way we got here is just teams want the most efficient practice, right? They want the most efficient practice, so they're gonna talk to the other team and be like, oh, we're just gonna, you know, ban these maps. We're gonna pick this map over and over and over again. You know, we've had some scrims, even streamed ones, where the enemy teams come in, we ban this and this and this map, you know, and then you know, you don't pick those maps in the scrim, and they're gonna ban those for the whole of the tournament because those are the maps they want to practice. And if every team does that, they're just going to ban the same like 4 or 5 maps, and then you only have to practice 8 maps, right? You just limit the map pool by banning the things, and I feel like that's what they're doing in Korea, is they want to limit the map pool. They don't even want the best map for their team. They probably just like those maps, and they want to limit the map pool, and it's the ones they've practiced the most, so they want to play them in the match. Because every other team also doesn't ban those maps, so they play them in scrims all the time, right? And I think it's almost like a flaw, like thinking that your highest chance of winning is the map you've practiced the most, right? Because the other teams also practice that the most. And I think, you know, the more this goes on, like the longer time of practice you have, the more you're going to want to limit your map pool, the more you're going to almost gentleman's agreement, like the map bans, because that's the ones you've played the most. But I also feel like it's like a player and coaching fault that you're not exploiting these maps that the other teams aren't picking, right? I think in EMEA and NA we've seen a little bit more diversity. But as more the patch goes on and as more the Mauga meta happens, that goes away, right? Because the problem is also, you've now just got the Mauga meta, so it doesn't really matter what map you go to, because it's going to be a Mauga mirror anyway, right? So you might as well do it on the map you've practiced the most.
Sure.
So it also becomes a thing where, you know, you want to go Ilios, right? And you want to play Winston, but it's probably just going to lose to Mauga anyway. So then we might as well play Lijiang, where Mauga's good, and that's the map we've practiced all the time. You know, because every other team picks that map in scrims as well. And the way scrims work is you get free map picks. The enemy team gets free map picks. So if they're like, oh, we know we're going to ban this map in scrim, like we know we're going to ban Ilios, we're never going to pick it, right? And then if you don't pick it, nobody's practicing Ilios at all, right? So that's why it has 0 picks in Korea, because nobody's practicing that map, because half the teams are banning it, which makes every team not want to practice it. So it's almost like a vicious cycle. I think it's a flaw in coaching. I personally really like the ban system. And a big reason why we brought on our analyst Danny is because we want to see what every team is playing. We had him skim through like all the VODs of every team that's scrimming, just seeing what maps they're picking in scrims, keeping up a database. Like, we're actually really serious about like not just playing for like, oh, we like this map, our players like this map. No, we want to be like, oh, they didn't practice that map once, we want to pick that map, you know, because we know we're really flexible. So I'm actually, you know, a big proponent of the map bans, and you know, maybe I'm giving away like stuff we're gonna do here, but it's because I don't want to see like this. What I want them to change is I want them to not make it so you have to ban every map at the start of a series, because I want to be able to adapt during the series, right? I feel like right now the way it works is you load into the Faceit lobby, you do every single ban, and then that's it. You know, you don't get to pick your maps anymore. What I want is you ban map 1, right? You do your 2 bans, you pick your cough, and the next map, it finishes, then you do it again, right? Like, I feel like it's a very simple change, but it allows you to change up your strategy, right? Like, maybe you're not putting the Mauga mirror on map 1, and you don't see hope in it. Okay, second map, I'm going to ban King's Row, and we're going to force something else on map 2, even if it's worse, right? But if you just go into it, you don't know if you're the better Mauga team than the enemy team. You're just going to do the safe thing, where it's just pick all the good Mauga maps, the ones you've practiced the most. So I feel like that's the flaw in the system, where you want like the bans to be across the series. But personally, I do like the ban system because it leads to more coach gap in the enemy team, and I want to be able to coach gap the enemy coach.
I think honestly, it's like, I agree with Cass in the sense that it's like wrong for Korea, like for everyone to pick the same map is for me just like clearly wrong from a competitive perspective. Like, this is an obvious prisoner's dilemma that like we can cooperate and we all pick the same map, but it obviously benefits the defector to like actually just pick a different map. Like if I know everyone else plays Li Xiang, so I like spend all my practice on Ilios and I pick Ilios every time because I know like that's a huge advantage for me, right? If I'm the high seed and I can force you to play the map you haven't practiced, it's like a huge advantage for me because I'm gonna practice it. So there should always be an incentive to defect from the status quo, just by virtue of it being the status quo. You can defect from it and be the only team who's ready to play this other map, and say you force it to happen, you can play it. Koth is a little weird control because it's the first map type. So teams can be like for instance, if you're like the high seed, you're like dominating everyone, you can only practice one control if you want to, because you will always pick the control. So that's a little weird. Control is like a little, slightly different because it's coming from a different, like the person who picks it is picking it because of an outside factor almost from the match itself. So control, I could see this being a little bit more of a problem on, but I'm a huge fan of this, the getting rid of the forced game mode map order. I think that's a huge positive change for the game. I think when Flashpoint first came out, maybe they really wanted to showcase it and stuff like that. And then back in the day, they really didn't want 2CP to be map 5 because it was like really likely to draw, or like by far the most likely game mode to draw. And even a long time ago, it was really common to draw on hybrid and things like that because of like not having a tick system and things like that. But I think honestly, those things are relics maybe of a bygone era where now that they always had some problems with them, where like now with Flashpoint, it was like, oh great, we lost the map before Flashpoint. We get to pick between two maps that are really similar. I mean, in the end, Flashpoint is like probably going to have the same meta on all the Flashpoint maps almost every patch. It's hard to see too much difference there. And so you're just comfort picking. And then so you basically just get screwed over if that was your map pick. Like you got the map pick for Flashpoint and it just didn't matter. Versus the map pick for Hybrid might be really impactful. And I think that was always a bit of a competitive flaw, that like some map picks are better than others. And so being able to just be like, no, we're going to go to Circuit Royale right now because we really like Circuit Royale. Like you can really change the tempo of the series and have a much bigger impact much earlier on in the series, because you have a, like, as the loser, you get a much more powerful thing now. Like that's inherently going to mitigate 3-0s a little bit, because at least you lost that map. You can pick like 10 maps or 12 maps or something with all the other maps in the pool, with all the other game modes. I think that's good. I think it leads to closer series, and then that is a very good thing.
Yeah, I think what they should do is not make Escort map 5. I think that's really bad, because I think Escort is like the one like really strategic one where I'd want a map 5 to be a dogfight, So what I think they should do is move Flashpoint from map 4 to map 5, which would also nerf the seed, because right now the way it works is the higher seed gets to pick the cough. The lower seed then gets to ban one of the coughs, but the higher seed gets to pick the cough. They get to pick the push, and they get to pick the escort at the end. And the lower seed gets to ban one of each of those maps. So you nerf the top seed by moving Flashpoint to map 5, because it doesn't matter which one you pick anyway, for the most part, right? And then they get to pick the escort, which would be map 4, which would buff the lower seed a little bit, because they only get to pick 2 of the maps, but they would get to pick the hybrid and the escort, which are the most diverse maps, actually.
I'm just curious what you think about this whole thing of killing the map order, where there's just no longer a quote map 5. I mean, the map 5 is just like whatever you haven't played yet. Like well, that's how.
Then banning doesn't work anymore, right? Because you can't ban from, like, at that point you have to ban from the entire map pool, which then did the whole like philosophy of you should be able to do map 1 and then map 2 after the map 1. You have to pick then. I think if you just kill the map order, then you have to do like loser picks just any map, right? And that's not a bad system, but it kills the whole ban system, which I think is actually really interesting.
Or you could just pre-submit. I mean, you already pre-submit your bans, right? So isn't it change nothing there? Like you pre-submit a ban for every map type, and then when the loser picks, they're picking from all the remaining maps, but you still got your bans in. You can still say we're going to be a team that never plays Paraiso or whatever if you want to. But then, you know what I mean? Like the enemy team gets to pick whatever the other three hybrids. They get to pick a Flashpoint or an escort, or you know what I mean? They get so many more picks. I think that's
right, like, yeah, I could see that, where you could only play each game mode once per series.
That's how it is now. That's the change for Korea and Japan, is like you can pick any game mode you want. That's the fundamental thing I'm most excited about, where it's like
right. But they're
'Cause we're
removing
never
the
seeing
ban.
escort-
They're removing the ban system as a whole, right? Like that.
Are they actually? Okay.
I
That
think
it
so,
seems
yeah.
unnecessary to
I
me.
think they're removing the ban system. No.
I'm not sure. It doesn't say in the announcement per se the exact details.
I was
But-
assuming that the bans would still be in place, and it's just
I think someone commented about it and said that they were removing the bans. I think.
That's interesting. Okay, so yeah, because I feel like that's shouldn't be necessary to me for this change. Like I like the ban system too. I agree with you guys on that. I think it adds more strategy and allows teams to optimize their practice. I don't think you should like fully nuke the ban system, but at the same time, I like the idea of I feel like we could have our cake and eat it too here in terms of make more agency for teams, more coach gap potential, or just for the players, like their strategic style, their preferences can be more impactful based on, and they can force that earlier in the series. You don't have to like survive into the map that you're hoping to play. Like we are really good at Circuit Royale. We just can't play that map until the end, unless we survive to map 5. You know what I mean? We can't get any kind of wind in our sails in the series. And even if you get 3-1 and like your 1 was Circuit Royale, I still feel like that's a really good thing for the esport and for the fans, because like you might never, your team could get 3-0'd and you just never got to see their like 2 best maps because they didn't make it there. You know, and I think that's no map bans.
Here we go. You go
Why?
from map, bro.
I don't get that.
Yeah,
Actually,
no map
I
bans.
feel like that shouldn't be necessary, but whatever.
Yeah, I
Maybe
kind of
it-
like what Jake proposes, where you can keep the map bans and still do loser's pick from any game mode, right? I think there's a couple very similar game. Like the problem there is there's a couple very similar, like push, Flashpoint, and Control are like somewhat similar, where then Hybrid and Escort are completely different. But I could see like a middle ground where you can keep the map bans, you can still do your scouting work like as a coach, and you can ban their really strong maps, while lose your picks, which should make the series closer, because it has been kind of 3-0 Overwatch, which is why they're making this change.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it's a little bit of a flaw where everybody's just picking Lijiang and Kingsrow.
Yeah. It's a bit unprecedented too. I mean,
Which
yeah.
also, like, I think the ban system are like part of the what ought to be a prisoner's dilemma. And when I say prisoner's dilemma, I mean for those not extreme nerds among us, that there's an incentive to defect from the established status quo. Like everyone else is doing something, you by doing something different, you force somebody to do something they've never done before, and you're ready, they're not. So that like should be a reason that no matter what the popular map is, you want to play another map because you know that's the popular map, so you can be the only team who's been scrimming Ilios, and then you pull it out in the match. That should be your advantage, or any map for that matter. That you have this like pocket pick that you've been practicing that other people don't like. That's your advantage. So honestly, the ban system actually incentivizes that, even though it's not happening in Korea. I feel like I don't know, maybe they're forced to make some kind of change, but I don't think getting rid of the ban. I think it's kind of counterproductive, actually.
Well, I feel like the problem with the ban system right now is that the outskirts maps are getting banned, right? The most extreme cases of maps, those are the ones getting banned, right? So I can tell you in Korea, like some teams want to play dive, but every map at least is getting banned. Like first ban by the first pick, that map is getting banned, and then the second pick can ban Lijiang, but then they're left with Samoa or Nepal, where realistically they're also going to play Mauga Mirror. Ilios is probably the one map where you maybe don't have to play Mauga Mirror, but that one's getting banned by the team that wants to play the Mauga Mirror, right? So maybe there's just not enough bans where you can shy away from the status quo, and that just leaves like the middle of the pack maps, right? The non-extreme maps left over.
You make it sound like there's too many bans. Like, why have Circuit Royale in the pool if it's gonna get banned all the time?
Well, there's 2 bans per like game mode that has 4 picks, right? So for KOF, Escort, and Hybrid, you have 2 bans, right? Both teams get 1 ban, which just makes it so the team that doesn't have a sniper player just always bans Circuit Royale. Right, it's that simple, right? And the team that doesn't have a Ramatra player is always going to ban Shambali. So then for Escort, you're most of the time going to be left with Dorado and what's the other map in the pool?
Rialto.
Dorado and
Rialto.
Rialto, right? Because those are the middle of the pack maps. And then if both teams think they have a sniper player, then you're going to Circuit Royale. But it's basically up to both teams' agency to allow that and want it, which is why you're seeing so much Kingsrow, because people aren't allowing like Midtown, right? Because that would be a map where maybe double flex
something else
support
can
Sigma
work.
can see
Yeah.
play.
That's a fair point. Maybe in that sense, there's because you don't know what the other team's gonna pick, you can like you know, unless you have both the Ramatra and the Sigma, both the Sniper and, you know, something else, right? Like that's only in that case would you not ban either of those maps, and you'll ban one of the middle of the road maps. But then there's more conditions for that to be true. Whereas if you're just like on average, most teams are gonna push towards the middle of like the most normal map, the least weird map that's like the least cheesy. You gotta have all the cheese maps in the pool at the same time.
All right. So we got a little bit more of your time before I know you guys have to go practice, and you know it's a very important week, so we want to get those team meetings, that practice going. But of course we have to talk a little bit about OWCS. So I want to kick things off. Just spend 5 minutes on this. Last night actually Riker had a tweet where he tweeted about some of the seeding stuff going on going into this tournament as well, because I think it's worth highlighting. You know, if this is something players feel really important about, where he talks about that. With the current seeding, you can argue M80 lost to us on purpose to get better seeding during the bracket stage. The same can go for other teams in the main event. Why are teams that win during groups punished for winning? And he basically goes through the seeding here for some of these teams. So I guess here, you know, if you're timeless, you got, you know, you got to play Toronto Defiant later on in the upper bracket. Whereas if you're M80 in this regard, maybe you have a bit more favorable of a matchup against Luminosity. Strength of the game, you know, that's subjective. I don't know what's going on in scrims, but do any of you have some opinions on the way the seeding goes down and how you'd improve it, or is it a smaller detail?
I think a lot of the issues stem from how Swiss was done at the start of the tournament, where like a lot of it was RNG. You end up in a situation where like the better teams weren't fully fleshed out, and you end up having like in the group stages at least, you know, Timeless and M80 are playing each other like really early, and you can argue that they're like at least top 4, right? You can at least argue that. So that definitely messed things up a little bit. And then also in regards to Swiss, there was a lot of, I believe, 7-2 teams that were, you know, tied, and like half of them got cut. I think if there was like another round of Swiss, maybe 2, we could have probably had a little bit better seating in that regard. So I think a lot of the issues stem from that. With the bracket that was, you know, introduced to us, they had like that bracket posted, and then they made the change yesterday where Timeless and Pip were like on the lower end of the bracket on the other side, and then you know, particular people complained about it, and they changed the bracket again. Now with this bracket, I think like the seating from a traditional double elim standpoint, like the top end like adds up to like 18, 16, and the bottom ends up like adding up to 20, and that's like really bizarre. It should be Timeless and Pip at the lower end, and then students of the game in M80 like at the upper end. That's how the WLM bracket should end up being. But the complaint for this specifically is that this bracket is just like, it's not how a WLM bracket's usually supposed to look like. But
yeah. I don't know if you have a point about that, Casores, as well, before we chat more about the teams, but obviously something worth bringing up because it is not optimal in that regard.
Yeah, I think normally it's always. I mean, the seating was a little bit scuffed with the Swiss stage. I think hopefully going forward they could fix that. I know the FACEIT admins have been reaching out to teams like, how can we fix this? So hopefully they take a lot of the advice we've given. But it just looks weird, right? Since when is it not 1 against 8, 2 against 7, you know, 3 against 8? Like that's. It seems like a no-brainer. That's how esports has done it for a long time. I think it's because they wanted to do like somebody from Group A against a second seed of Group B, but I think. I
mean, the problem is within the groups, they just like haven't identified actually who is like the 8th seed. You know what I mean? Like there isn't really an 8 actually. There's just a bunch of 1s and 2s. Like the only reason there's a quote 8 is because of the Swiss stage, which is just flawed. Like I think that's the fundamental issue here, right? Like if there were, because you split into all these 4 groups before coming back into this bracket, all we really have is a bunch of 1s and 2s. So that's like, you could put like the C1 and the B, the B2, right? Or instead of A, and you make A and D instead, you know, you could mix the groups however you want. But in the end, the real reason a team is quote 1 or 8 is from the Swiss, which I think that's the core issue here, right? That like, in the Swiss, there's not enough differentiation. But it's also kind of the nature of having a very large open qualifying field at that level. Like you have to have a Swiss stage. I mean, you guys played what, 9 matches in Swiss? I mean,
Mhm.
that's already a lot. For me, I think this is just kind of the reality of having a really big open Swiss pool. Maybe you can make it a little bit better. And that, like, I think part of it is like maybe on the Swiss, at least the teams who are like tied on win-loss, maybe they should play one more round, because I think getting eliminated from the tournament based on map win-loss is a little bit silly in 9 matches. But then, like, are you gonna make everyone play? The teams who are like 0-9 are gonna play a match? I mean, or I guess like some part of the Switch should just probably end. You know, you're 9-0, whatever. Okay, it's like done. There's not another. You shouldn't have to play another game if you're the only 9-0 team. For me, but then like at least the teams who are 7-2, maybe you at least get one more final match to be like who survives of the 7-2 teams. But I guess, you know, you could think the map score is also doing that, like, oh, you should have won more maps or whatever. But then that's RNG based on did you actually play a real strong team or not in the Swiss stage. So I mean, in the end, I think this is actually a hard problem to solve, like in at least an easy, simple way. Or you could just kill change the way the group stage is done. But I don't know. In the end, it's also double ELM, so I don't feel too bad about it, in the sense that, like, even if you lose your first match because you had like a stronger opponent, I mean, how many teams are you really dodging in the end? Like, when you play 2 of the 8 teams in the overall pool,
Yeah.
like
No,
you have to
'cause
get really unlucky, right? To like have 2 like, oh, this is a really unfair matchup. You know what I mean? If you are one of the top, whatever, how many teams qualify? 3 qualify
8.
out of it?
Oh yeah, free qualified to
3.
to the LAN.
Yeah. So I think that's the huge differential there. Like, so maybe like one of the top, like the 4th team could be getting screwed in this situation, which is fair. That really sucks if you're that team. But I'm wondering, like, well, I guess curious, what would those suggestions be from you guys? Like, what would you see as, how do you rectify this in a way that's like reasonable for them to run and can be implemented next time?
I think for the first stage, there's always going to be like a few issues, like accurately seeding teams, because we don't know who's going to be the best at the start. That's that's completely understandable. So this is just like a stepping stone for a stage 2 being better. However, for like I said earlier about Swiss stage, I think their needs. I am not a fan of like RNGing, like, some teams that are 7-2, because some of those teams probably could have ended up playing, let's just say, a 7-2 team played, Toronto Defiant and Timeless, and then they don't make it because they played 2 of arguably the best teams, right? And then for group stage, obviously there's an instance where times versus M80 happen, and for me personally, it doesn't quite matter like who we play. We're gonna go in and try to win no matter what, right? I just think that um, at least from a bracket standpoint, like the bracket doesn't make sense in terms of the upper side, like adds up to 18, the bottom side adds up to 20. That doesn't make sense. If you were just to flip where Timeless and Pip plays with M80 and the other team, it'll all add up and make sense from a seeding perspective. But that aside, moving forward, to mitigate the amount of like teams put in the Swiss pool, the top 4 teams from like this main event should not participate into the group stage for the next stage.
I like that idea of like just the biggest problem with Swiss is that there's like the juggernauts that like will 3-0 stomp you. If you're anything but another top 4 team, basically you're gonna get 3-0 stomped by the best teams in the region, and that'll nuke your map score in Swiss. You're gonna get 3-0'd. Whereas like a team could be 3-0ing everyone else, and then they play a juggernaut and they get 3-0'd, and then so it looks like they've lost a few maps, but really they just low rolled like one particular match. I think once you pull out these like strongest teams from that Swiss pool, we might get a much more reasonable result out of Swiss. Because the real problem is when you're trying to qualify as many teams as did qualify out of Swiss, that's when like there's a ton of these 7-2 ties. But we might see less of that if it's more like 9-0 and 8-1 teams, because no one's getting there's no juggernauts like being so high above the field that they're 3-0 stopping everyone. Basically get out of here, Cass. We don't need you for the Swiss stage. Take a vacation, you guys.
I definitely feel like some number of top teams should not have to play the Swiss stage again. I think my biggest thing is I don't mind the bracket, of course, it should be a little bit more accurately seeded, and they should change the system, which I think they're doing for next stage, so there's no need to address it. I think the biggest thing for me is they're only taking 1 week for the whole bracket stage, and they're not streaming all the matches, while they took 2 weeks for the group stage. I think if you can make that group stage, like maybe not stream some matches or maybe co-stream some of them, people don't care that much about like all the qualifying weeks, but they care so much about the main bracket, you know? So I think they need to make at least a bracket stage like 2 weeks, you know? Like,
hey man, me and Jake, we agree with that. We
agree. We need more days with the analyst desk.
We want to be on air more.
This is for competitive integrity. Shout out from the rooftops, Cass. We will be right behind you, brother.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, that will also see like more adaptations in the bracket stage, right? I feel like you have to rush through the whole bracket in like 1 weekend. You can't stream all the matches. Teams don't have that much time to prepare. Like I know in the first day, if we win our first round, we have to play like two hours later again against the second team. And you've seen our side of the bracket. We probably, if we win, you know, we probably have the hardest bracket out of anyone, which for the first seed, I think that's pretty crazy because we would have to play Looking for Org, who's arguably like top 5, Timeless if they win against Pirates of Pajamas, and then, you know, whoever comes out of the lower side of the bracket. So even though we're the first seed, we probably have the hardest bracket out of anyone, which I don't mind, right? I love competition. I want to knock these teams to the lower bracket. But I think, you know, take 2 weeks, stream every match that we play at least, you know, because they are such entertaining matches, and this is what people have been waiting for. But we're rushing through it, it feels like, in the group stage. It almost felt like we had no games this last weekend. We had like, you know, 6 games for each side. It's like 2 days work time, you know? It's
Yeah, speaking of rushing through, I know we only have 15 minutes left here, so I want to move on to chat a bit about the region. I'd love to have you guys back on and chat more about your individual teams and the journeys and, you know, get more into the details, but, you know, time is of the essence here. So I do want to, you know, in typical Plat Chat fashion, typically we just come out here, we make like preds, and we'd be like, who's going to advance and like who's going to win these matches, and like, oh, people love the preds, whatnot. But, you know, given that we have the coach of Toronto Defiant and the coach of Timeless here, it would be a bit weird to just like make you predict who is gonna win and stuff like that. So instead, let's assume that Toronto and Timeless, you know, make it to the grand final. Who are the other like top 3, top 4 teams? Because the point I'm getting at here is that you will guys actually have more insight into these other teams, the best players in the region, who is standing out, whereas, you know, even me and Jake to an extent, like we don't even get to watch as much scrims, as much top tier play as you guys do. So in this non-Overwatch League format, where there's opportunity for more players who haven't had their chance to do, you know, their time in the sun yet, who are like the teams and players you're looking out for? So, you know, Toronto Timeless aside here, Tensa, like what team are you really looking out for here at the main event that like looks scary to you?
I mean, the obvious one for us is like M80. Like, you know, we beat them in group stage, sure. But you know, that's a team that, you know, over time they'll definitely improve at a faster rate comparative to like the other teams. And then like another obvious one would probably be like Luminosity Gaming, formerly, you know, Maryville, because that has been a team together for like about a yearish with like the addition of Luke Mino. But I think a team that should get shouted out here would be like Students of the Game, because they're a team that was like put together last second, and I think they've been putting out like, you know, pretty good performance recently. And I also expect LFO to get at least a fair bit better this week, because, you know, they lost to it was Citrus, right?
Yeah, Citrus Nation, yeah.
I think, you know, the next week they, you know, 3-0 them in a pretty comfortable fashion. I think that team, don't count them out. And then I think Pip is pretty decent. I think most of the teams like are fairly competitive with each other, but, you know, I would definitely keep an eye out on, you know, the less obvious ones like Students of the Game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a stacked main event because like so many of these teams are really competitive, and, you know, meta shift going on. Casores, you've been in the Overwatch League for so long. Who are maybe some of the non-Overwatch League players that maybe like stood out to you in the group stages, and like someone who you're keeping your eye out for in the main event that might give you a tough time? I know it's a team game and all, and like Mauga meta, but like who's an individual that maybe like people don't know about as much?
I think for Luminosity Gaming, Squid is a really solid Kiriko. I think just his Kiriko alone makes them really competitive on all the comps that they play with Dante in. I think another like big shout that people just don't know, like people know about PGE now, but I think students of the game have Scissors, who's actually been grinding like a ton. He actually does really well in ranked, and I think that team, for a last second team, like Tensa said, has been really well constructed. I think Infected and Scissors and PGE together are actually like, they're below the top teams, I'd say still, but they have upset potential. And if they come out with some good games, I think definitely look out for I think both Squid and Scissors. They're like not streaming players. Nobody knows about them, but I actually think like they're really good. And then, of course, I know we weren't going to talk about Timeless, but I think Rocket is one of the best tracers. If they can make it work with Tracer, he actually, goes toe to toe with any tracer in this like region, even Sugar Free.
Yeah. Jake, anyone we missed here?
I've been excited to see Infected make it to 18 or 17 or whatever.
Infected is getting a lot of praise
for a long time. I mean, I remember playing with him like a long time ago, years ago, and he was like, I don't know, 14, 15, and just thinking like, oh, this guy's actually really good. And like, I mean, it's funny because for me, it's like it's funny to see all these names where like, dude, I remember back in the day, it's like playing against a lot of these guys, and they were like really kids, they were probably like 14, 15, like King and Vision and even like a lot of these names like Chopper and stuff like that. Like these guys, I remember playing with them years and years ago in ranked, and so they've been kind of grinding, rising to the top. And now I think this is like one of the great things about OWCS is we're seeing all these new faces, and people are starting to see, I think, some of the real potential that these players have. Like they can go, like you said, Cass, go toe to toe. And I think that's a very, honestly, for me, this is like the fruits of many years of Overwatch League being so strong in NA. Is like the NA ranked was actually a very good place to improve for the last many years. And so we're seeing a ton of incredibly strong players rising out of that. Which I think is super exciting for NA in particular. Of all the regions, I think NA benefited the most, where like the ranked became insanely competitive for the last many years, and produced a lot of these talents. Obviously, they're working incredibly hard to do that too. But I think to see all these players coming up at once, I think there is like a collective thing going on here that for me is like, as a big fan of NA Overwatch, I'm makes me a lot more hopeful for the long-term future of our competitiveness as a region, and not just being like, League of Legends where you go to the Worlds and you lose to Korea and China and it's not competitive at all. Like I think that's in the end, like that's part of the fun of the regional Overwatch, is to see the different regions come together and clash. And I think, yes, there's the top teams that are probably favored and are probably gonna be the ones going, but you never know. And like you guys said, there is upset potential. And so I want to see some upsets, here. I think I agree with everyone, all the teams you guys called out. I think the top 6 is pretty clear. And then I think it's very competitive within that. I think Pirates in Pajamas and Shikigami and Hikari could pull it out, but I think those are by far like the most going to have the teams with the most difficult road, the most unlikely path to qualifying for the main event. But the other 6, I really think it's too close to call.
Yeah. I gotta ask you here, Tensa. You've been grinding in the North American scene for quite some time here now. Do you feel like this is a real opportunity for you and the guys to really make a big impression here when you're facing off against teams like M80 and Toronto Defiant?
Yeah, I've been coaching like some of these players for a few years now, and I have a lot of confidence in them coming up to this OWCS tournament this weekend. I think they have a really good shot at placing top 3, even winning the whole thing. This recent tournament with Flash Ops, they were one team fight away from beating the Timeless team that won the event.
Yeah, I was watching that. They won that game. They maybe the little lack of some veteran presence to throw that push away, but they would have won that. They had like a 95% to win. They couldn't close it.
They had it for sure, and they have another shot to win it all, right? So I have full confidence in my team.
Yeah, I don't want to put a target on your back, Casores. I'm sorry, but you kind of have that.
You are the team with a target on your back. Come on,
stacked,
that's
like,
pretty
you kinda
obvious,
deserve
right?
that, yeah.
That's the life you live when you got Marin and someone coming in off a championship. You got so much ridiculous power on that team. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Toronto Defiant's the favorite.
Yeah, and even though we're the favorite, we are practicing like free blocks almost every day, right? Like we're actually like trying to treat this like it's still the Overwatch League, and we are, of course, having, some of the best like accommodation, some of the most funding in, the Overwatch CS still, but that's why we're looking to go extra hard to, prove that we are the top dog. And I would say, to your point earlier, for the international events, even though you might hate this Mauga meta, I think actually like a Lucio Moya or Lucio Kiri like brawl meta is where teams like, from Europe and NA would be teams in like Korea,
historically,
right?
it's been the meta that they don't want to play.
That's where it's like, I think Korea's got that on lockdown, like Falcons with Stalker on Tracer and Brig on
that region
backline.
Is so stacked.
But,
you look at like 3 of the top teams.
But I think if it's this meta, actually, like NA and EU can be very competitive.
Yeah. Well, I hate to break it to you, Casores, but hopefully it doesn't last that long. Because that was still like 2.5 months away. But yes, I mean, it was funny. I brought this up on stream. It was funny. It was like a Reddit post like three weeks ago. Like, what meta could Falcons possibly not qualify in? And then, Mauga meta comes around and they almost lose to FTG, I think, from the gamer in that 5 mapper. But all right, yeah, it's gonna be a really exciting event. I'm really looking forward to it. Some things we didn't get to discuss, of course. You brought it up quickly. Was that all 4 matches on the first day are gonna be played at the same time, which is not optimal because we won't get to catch all the games. Especially like you said, Casores. Especially now in the playoffs format, like these are the matches you really want to watch. Elimination matches, the best teams on the line. So we didn't get to discuss that today, but it's obviously a big shame. And like I mentioned as well, the Falcons match, a lot of people are really excited about the Falcons match. They thought it was great Overwatch. Really excited about the Violet and Finn backline, but we didn't have time to cover that. Casores is laughing. He has some experience with maybe a couple of those players. So we didn't get to discuss that. I know you guys have to go, but before we gotta get off here, every week we do Bren's Player of the Week. A long-standing segment from Brennon Hook here. But we do crown one person in the community, one player in the community that's really stood out this past week. So I don't know if there was anyone in particular this past week that stood out to you guys. If you follow the broadcast, if you follow the community, if you have any nominations, we do take them. Otherwise, we always do a good job coming up with one. So, anyone that comes to mind for anyone?
I would normally say a player from my team, but we didn't play last week. So, if there's a player that I would give Player of the Week to, it would be PG, in my opinion. He's been, popping off these past few matches that he's played, and he's been like growing as like a personality. So, I'd give him Player of the Week.
I think I'll give the Player of the Week to all the co-streamers. I think everybody that's been co-streaming, the Overwatch CS stage, I think they've been bringing in actually really good viewer numbers. I'm actually like pretty excited about, even in a group stage, it might be less exciting to see that in the main stage and hopefully, up in those numbers. And I think, it brings out really good content, and I'm really excited about the co-streams. I think, shout out to Blizzard and Faceit for removing, like they had a rule where players weren't going to be able to stream their POVs.
Yeah.
They've now turned that back. So I think, the more perspectives on the game you have and the more like choice you have, the more people that are going to watch. So I think, a special shout out to like everybody that's been co-streaming. We've been allowing, a couple streamers to come into our scrims even to co-stream that. So we really want to foster it too. But I think, watching Emong and watching like players' POVs, it's been insanely fun. Watching Reinforce co-stream as well.
Well, I wouldn't put that up there with those other guys. Not on that level. But thank you, Casores. I appreciate it. Jake, do you have a final shout out, Jake?
No, I think these guys did a great job. I'm just super excited.
PG and co-streamers.
yeah. No, I think those are great nominations, great nods. I think there's just a lot of players to be excited about. So for me, there's no one true standout this week. everybody's a winner.
Everyone's a winner. All right. Well, look, guys, I really appreciate you guys taking the time in a busy week for you guys, and I'd love to have both of you on some other time to chat more about your individual teams and the players, because I know there's a lot of stories going on that I'd love to chat about. But instead, we talked a lot about Mauga this episode. Who would have thought? Maybe that's my fault as the host for setting you guys up for that. But yeah, again, I appreciate you guys being on, and I wish you the best of luck this coming week. So that's gonna do it for Plat Chat Overwatch episode 218. We'll see you next week for episode 219.